Risk Management, Controlling Risk. Part 2. Risk Control Practices. Between the difficult task of valuing information assets and the dynamic nature of the ALE calculations, it is no wonder that organizations typically look for a more straightforward method of implementing controls. This preference has prompted an ongoing search for ways to design security architectures that go beyond the direct application of specific controls for specific asset vulnerability. Quantitative assessment performs asset valuation with actual values, or estimates, which may be difficult to assign specific values. Organizations could use qualitative assessments instead, using scales instead of specific estimates of value. A more granular approach, the hybrid assessment, tries to improve upon the ambiguity of qualitative measures without resorting to the unsubstantiated estimation process that may arise when quantitative measures are used. The Delphi Technique, named for the Oracle of Delphi, is a process whereby a group rates or ranks a set of information. The individual responses are compiled and then returned to the group for another iteration. This process continues until the entire group is satisfied with the result. This technique can be applied to the development of scales, asset valuation, asset or threat ranking, or any scenario that can benefit from the input of more than one decision maker. The operationally critical threat, asset, and vulnerability evaluation method, OCTAVE, defines the essential components of a comprehensive, systematic, context-driven, self-directed information security risk evaluation. By following the OCTAVE method, an organization can make information protection decisions based on risks to the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of critical information technology assets. The operational or business units and the IT department work together to address the information security needs of the organization. This slide provides an overview of the OCTAVE method. There are three variations of the OCTAVE method. The original OCTAVE method, which forms the basis for the OCTAVE body of knowledge and which was designed for larger organizations, 300 or more users. OCTAVE S for smaller organizations of about 100 users, and OCTAVE Allegro, a streamlined approach for information security assessment and assurance. Microsoft Corporation also promotes a risk management approach. There are 4 phases in the Microsoft Information Security risk management process. These are assessing risk, conducting decision support, implementing controls, and measuring program effectiveness. This graphic illustrates the 4 stages of the Microsoft risk management approach. FAIR, the Factor Analysis of Information Risk framework, includes a taxonomy for information risk, standard nomenclature for information risk terms, a framework for establishing data collection criteria, measurement scales for risk factors, a computational engine for calculating risk, and a modeling construct for analyzing complex risk scenarios. Basic FAIR analysis is comprised of 10 steps and 4 stages. In stage 1, you identify scenario components by identifying the asset at risk and identifying the threat community under consideration. In stage 2, you evaluate loss event frequency by estimating the probable threat event frequency, estimating the threat capability, estimating control strength, deriving vulnerabilities, and deriving loss event frequencies. In stage 3, you evaluate the probable loss magnitude by estimating a worst-case loss and then estimating probable loss. In stage 4, you derive and articulate risk. Unlike other risk management frameworks, FAIR relies on the qualitative assessment of many risk components using scales with value ranges, for example, very high to very low. This slide illustrates the components that go into the evaluation of risk using the FAIR method. The International Standards Organization 27000 series includes a standard for the performance of risk management, ISO 27005. The 27005 document includes a 5-stage risk management methodology. This includes risk assessment, risk treatment, risk acceptance, risk communication, and risk monitoring and review. The National Institute for Standards and Technology has modified its fundamental approach to systems management and certification accreditation to one that follows the industry standard of effective risk management. As discussed in Special Publication 800-39, Managing Information Security Risk, Organization, Mission, and Information System View. The first component of risk management addresses how organizations frame risk or establish a risk context, that is, describing the environment in which risk-based decisions are made. The risk frame establishes a foundation for managing risk and delineates the boundaries for risk-based decisions within organizations. Establishing a realistic and credible risk frame requires that organizations identify risk assumptions, risk constraints, risk tolerance, and priorities and trade-offs. Integrated enterprise-wide risk management includes the strategic goals and objectives of organizations, organizational missions and business functions prioritized as needed, mission and business processes, enterprise and information security architectures, and system development lifecycle processes. The second component of risk management addresses how organizations assess risk within the context of the organizational risk frame. The purpose of the risk assessment component is to identify threats to organizations or threats directed through organizations against other organizations or the nation, vulnerabilities internal and external to organizations, the harm to organizations that may occur given the potential for threats exploiting vulnerabilities, and the likelihood that harm will occur. The end result is a determination of risk. To support the risk assessment component, organizations identify the tools, techniques, and methodologies that are used to assess risk, the assumptions related to risk assessments, the constraints that may affect risk assessments, roles and responsibilities, how risk assessment information is collected, processed, and communicated throughout organizations, how risk assessments are conducted within organizations, the frequency of risk assessments, and how threat information is obtained. The third component of risk management addresses how organizations respond to risk once that risk is determined based on the results of risk assessments. The purpose of the risk response component is to provide a consistent organization-wide response to risk in accordance with the organizational risk frame by 1. Developing alternative courses of action for responding to risk, 2. Evaluating the alternative courses of action, 3. Determining appropriate courses of action consistent with organizational risk tolerance, and 4. Implementing risk responses based on selected courses of action. The fourth component of risk management addresses how organizations monitor risk over time. The purpose of the risk monitoring component is to 1. Verify that planned risk response measures are implemented and information security requirements derived from traceable to organizational missions and business functions, federal legislation, directives, regulations, policies, and standards and guidelines are satisfied. 2. Determine the ongoing effectiveness of risk response measures following implementation. And 3. Identify risk-impacting changes to organizational information systems and the environments in which the systems operate. This slide illustrates the relationship between the components of the NIST risk management framework.